All right, so this problem is a cash and cash equivalence problem. It is the second problem in example number two. So the big idea about cash and this, topically, this is not as complex as bank recs. This is just a classification issue. It's an acknowledgement that when we list cash and cash equivalents on the balance sheet, it includes a lot of items that maybe you wouldn't have thought would go into the cash account because it's not, for example, cash and coin, right? It's not paper currency. But cash and cash equivalents has a lot more than just paper currency. And so we're going to go through this and then basically categorize these as cash or cash equivalents or something else. Okay. So we are establishing a cash balance or something at the end of December of 20x6. And our accountant is reconciling the notes related to cash and cash related holdings. And after looking through all this stuff, we found this information. So we have cash and coin on premises. This is obviously the native form of cash, the most cash that you can get, really, 5,350. This is certainly cash. Of this amount, so then we have checks, right? So our checks cash? Well, it depends. We have checks of $40,000. Of this amount, 5,250 were dated January 5th, 20x7. Well, we're not there yet, right? We're at the end of the year 20x6. We can't cash those checks yet. These are post-dated checks. And that means they're not cashable until the date that's written on the check. When that's the case, these checks are, in fact, still receivables. They are not cash, nor are they cash equivalents. They're accounts receivable. The rest were dated prior to December 31st. So we have these checks. We haven't not yet deposited them. But if they're dated prior to that, they're as good as cash. So we would record them as cash. Remember, even with that NSF check, we don't know who's NSF and who's not when someone writes us a check. If it's not, a non-negotiable check, for example, cashier's check or a money order, then we don't know. We record them as cash until we know otherwise. So 5,250 are receivables, and the remainder of that amount from 40,000 is cash. So subtracting 5,250 from 40,000 would give me three $34,750 remaining. So that amount of the checks is definitely cash. On this one, so Bevo deducts travel advances from future paychecks, which means that if our employees want to travel, right, we go ahead and give them the money, we pay for their flight, we book their tickets, their hotel, and then in the future, we'll garnish it from their paycheck. That's how they'll give it back to us. So $2,000 we're going to garnish from future employee salaries. And it hasn't happened yet. We're going to take it from their January 20x7 paychecks, but we're due to receive it. So since we're taking that money from our employees in the future, this is also a form of a receivable, right? We are due to receive that money in the future. So that 2000 becomes a receivable, given that we are going to take it from their paychecks in the future. All right. Lots of different short-term investments and bank accounts. So we have a balance of money market account without check cashing privileges. Money market accounts can come with or without check cashing privileges. They tend to have higher interest rates than, say, a checking account. If they don't have check cashing privileges, they're not quite as liquid. And without check cashing privileges, this is a cash equivalent. If we can write checks out of our money market account, then it would be cash. Just kind of adding that as a note. With check cashing, then it becomes just a source of cash for us, right? That's how I think of it. It is cash because, hey, I can write a check. I can basically use it as if it were cash. Whereas this one, I can't do that. So it's more just a cash equivalent. The balance of my checking account, that's cash. If it's a balance of a savings account, that's cash. Now, the next three are all sort of investments, right? Treasury bills. So basically, government borrowing. We hold some government-backed treasury bills. They originated on December 1st of this year, and they're going to mature on February 28th of the next year. Now, when it comes to classifying investments, they are not cash until they're paid, right? And until they turn into cash on, so for example, February 28th. Until that point, they're either going to be classified as investments or cash equivalents. And the litmus test, the deciding factor for whether this is a cash equivalent or an investment, is the original maturity. So I say that these originated. That means that that's when we invested. We invested on December 1st. We're getting our money back on February 28th. And so that's December, January, February, 3 months. So the original maturity is a 3 month original maturity. From buying the investment to getting my money back is a 3 month cycle. As long as as long as this original maturity is less than 4 months, then it is a cash equivalent. We also have some commercial paper. What's commercial paper? Commercial paper is a name commonly used for loans floated between businesses. So businesses will allow other businesses to borrow money, and they are almost always less than a year in terms of their original maturity. And this is a source of a lot of liquidity for many businesses. They originated on November 1st, 20x6, and they're maturing on January 31st, 20x7. All right, so let's see if this meets the original maturity litmus test. So we invested in them November 1st. We have all of November, all of December, and then they're going to mature in January 31st. Then this is also a cash equivalent because that's still a 3 month original maturity. And then we have a final one. This investment was entered into January 1st of 20x4. So that was quite some time ago. In our problem, we're about 3 years into it. It will mature within 3 months, but it doesn't matter that it's going to mature within 3 months because the original maturity was years in the making, right? It actually has an original maturity of 3 years and a month. So this is just a short-term investment because its original maturity was beyond 4 months. It will never become a cash equivalent, even when its maturity is 3 months, less than 3 months away when we're at December 31st at 6. All right. Bevo is due. Tax refund will not be paid until 20x7. Has dividend paying securities that will be paid dividends on January 1st, 20X7 for $3,000. These are both receivables. They are both amounts of money that are coming to us in the future, but have not yet come to us. These are receivables. Special kind, they're non-trade receivables, which hopefully is something you're putting into your vocabulary after watching Chapter 7 video playlist. Just means that we don't get them from customers. We're getting them from, for example, the government or from companies we've invested in. This one deals with a restriction on cash. They have to set aside $300,000 of cash at all times, legally binding debt covenants attached to debt securities that will mature in 3 years. So, a couple of things to remember about restricted cash. If the restrictions are legal, then we have to change our recognition of the cash account. It's not something we can just disclose. We actually have to remove the $300,000 from our cash account because it's legally restricted. We can't call it cash because if we call it cash, that says this is a liquid asset. I can use it whenever I want. And in this case, it's bound. I can't use it, right? And then it has another similar legally binding covenant of $150,000, but those guys are maturing within a year. So notice the 300,000 is tied to debt that we're going to pay off in 3 years. 150 is tied to debt that's going to be paid off midway through the next year. Both amounts are included in the money market account without check cashing privileges. And so we're holding the amount of money in here. That could change some of what we consider as a cash equivalent because neither of these can be considered cash or cash equivalent. Both of them are restricted cash. One of them is still current because it's tied to debt. It will free itself up within a year. The other, the 300,000, we have to keep it in there for 3 more years. So that's a long-term investment. So we got $300,000 of a long-term investment. And then we have $150,000 of a current asset. Both of these have to be recorded as restricted cash. And finally, it says Bevo had an overdraft of 10,000. There were no compensating balances or protections on the account. So a lot of times our accounts are set up with this. Tends to be one of the service fees that we're charged if it's set up. But if we don't have a compensating balance or a protection, then this becomes a liability of $10,000. If there were compensating balances, then we would just be charged an overdraft fee. It would come out of our bank account. It would not be a liability, but in this case, since we don't have that set up, it's an actual liability. And so this wants me to create a current balance sheet. And it doesn't go too far. So hopefully this isn't, we haven't really talked in extensively about balance sheets. But just to arrange, how it should go here, we have a lot of different items. I'm going to just start a list to get the totals rolling. I just made little notes. The 5,350 is cash. We said that 34,750 of these checks were cash. We also said that, where is it? 5,250 were receivables. I'm going to start its own little column here. Where is that? 5,250. The travel advances were receivable. We got a cash equivalent. I'm going to have a different column for those. So I'm going to take that amount, but I do want to be careful not to include 300 and 150 because it said that these amounts were included in my money market account without check cashing privileges. So it's not really 950 total, but that less the 300, less the 150. So there's 500,000 remaining after I make that adjustment. So that's my money market account without check cashing privileges. Those amounts deducted as my restricted cash. This is my long-term investment that's tied to the 3-year bonds. This is my current asset. It's tied to the debt that will mature in 20x7. I'm going to keeping that record so that when I actually make the balance sheet, I'll know how to classify those guys. Balance of the checking account we said was cash 564,112. The treasury bills, those were a cash equivalent, 6,000. The commercial paper, cash equivalent, 380. This investment, neither cash nor cash equivalent, short-term investment, 65. These are receivables, non-trade, 5,500, 3,000. I'll just add them together, 8,500. I already have the 300 and the 150 counted for over here. And then we have that liability for the overdraft of 10,000. So when I'm converting this into what's on my books for my balance sheet, cash and cash equivalents is always my first item because it's the most liquid asset in the company. We disclose these together, almost always together in tandem. Very few companies ever say, well, these are my cash equivalents. So then I just need to add up the total of those two columns in order to find it. And I will do so real quickly. 5,350, 34,750, and that balance. Then we have equivalents. So altogether, that yielded 1,490,212. So those two things are what provided my first balance sheet total. The next thing that is liquid after cash and cash equivalents, the next most liquid current asset is our short-term investments. However, we do have some restricted cash that is current restricted cash. That amount would be listed separately from my cash and cash equivalents, but just under them. Because this will definitely be liquid within the next year, and I will be free and clear to use it. Right? So it's showing my investors, yep, this 150 is not free and clear to use, but it will become free and clear to use within a year because it's a current asset. That's the $150,000 restricted cash. Next would be my short-term investments. We tend to call these marketable securities. That's the official industry term for them. So any investment that is not a cash equivalent that will mature and pay off within a year goes into that category. $65,000. Those tend to be more liquid because there's markets for these items than receivables where we're waiting for something to happen or someone to pay us. And then those receivables come next. And those total up to 15,750. So we'll just call them accounts receivable. And those are all the current assets we have. So that's the end of the current assets. Those are all going to be converted into cash or used up within a year. Now, I, like draw some ellipses because here, or I'll say total current assets, and then you'll know for sure this next thing is not a current asset. So if we had total my current assets, we put it there, and then we'd have more restricted cash right below that. And it's not a current asset because I won't be able to spend it until the restrictions go away. And those restrictions were tied to debt that had 3 years until that debt was going to mature. So this is going to have to sit for 3 years. This is a long-term investment. I know it's weird. It doesn't seem like an investment. However, we have set this money aside in order to borrow money. Okay. And so in that way, we're considering it an investment on that borrowing. And then finally, not even on the asset side of things, we'd have our current liability. We have you could just call it an overdraft liability. We're not very creative with names. Just tag it and show it's a tag it with the name overdraft and show it's a liability, and that's going to be for $10,000. So really what cash and cash equivalence is about is understanding how to break up cash information, account information, investment information, and information about receivables into the appropriate categories. Because, all of this is very specific and contextual, but it all belongs as a current asset. Okay. The one rule that I find that people find the most problematic of all of this is to remember um, the idea of the original maturity. And that is the time from which we invested until the time that that investment pays off has to be less than 4 months. It's not to say, oh, we're at December 31st. This is going to mature in 2 months. Therefore, it's cash equivalent. It doesn't matter that there's only 2 months between those two dates where we are and when that's going to pay off because this was a long-term investment when it started almost 3 years ago, right? So that's cash and cash equivalents. This is definitely the more involved problem of the two cash and cash equivalents. I would certainly give the other one a shot and see how you're doing with your ability to put those in the right buckets and understand where they should go.